Poco F4 GT is a puzzling proposition in many ways. Firstly, because when it first launched, there wasn't a regular version of the Poco F4, so it wasn't exactly clear where it fit in the range. And secondly, it is broadly speaking the exact same phone as the Redmi K50 Gaming, which in itself is remarkably similar to some Black Shark 5 series phones. In short, that means there are lots of blurred lines. On paper, however, it ticks all the right boxes for those who want a fast, powerful phone but would rather spend nearer £500 than £1,000. So the question is, does it deliver? I'm Cam Bunton from Pocket-lint, and this is our review of the Poco F4 GT. And while you're here, if you do like it, please do leave a thumbs up, subscribe and tap the notification bell to make sure you don't miss any more of our videos. When you're a company that churns out dozens of new phone models every quarter, making a brand new design for every regional variation of a product is not feasible. So it's not exactly surprising to see a cut and paste job on a Poco phone. In fact, Poco and Redmi, both Xiaomi sub-brands, have often released very similar devices in the past. For the most part, it's very much the typical glass rectangle slab, so we won't bore you with too many of the typical details. However, there's still plenty here that sets it apart from your typical smartphone. As always, it's the small details that make the difference. Elements like the gaping channels on the top and the bottom edge designed to let out the sound from the stereo speakers. It's very different to the grilled design we often see. Then there's the LED lighting around the camera unit on each side. Two mirrored chevrons of light illuminate and can be set to come on for different purposes. For instance, they'll light up when you plug the phone into charge, and you can have them flash and pulse when you receive notifications and phone calls. You can even have them light up when gaming. As if that wasn't magic enough, the LED flash for the camera itself is set in a Harry Potter-esque lightning-shaped scar next to the camera housing. Sadly though, you still have to manually hunt for the flashlight icon in quick settings to turn it on. You can't just yell Lumos Maxima and expect it to do something. One other quirk is something we've seen before on Black Shark gaming phones: shoulder buttons. You can flick a couple of switches on the right side of the phone and have two physical trigger switches pop out of the side. Their primary use is for gaming, meaning you can map them to different functions in different games. For instance, in Call of Duty Mobile, we'd have the left one set to aim and the right set to shoot. You can also have them programmed for other shortcuts when you're not gaming. In fact, you can program two actions for each button, one for a double press and another for a long press. Options include things like turning on the torch or launching the camera, initiating a voice recording or screen recording. It's a useful feature to have, especially if you like the tactile feedback that comes from pressing an actual button. And during games we found it helps, if only because it keeps our fingers off the screen and so we can see more content. One other button worth mentioning is the power button, which also doubles as the fingerprint sensor. This is both good and bad. Good in that it's reliable and quickly unlocks the phone when you mean to. Bad because it'll react to any touch of any part of your skin and register a failed attempt multiple times a day. As with any large-screened gaming phone, it is rather a large device. It's quite heavy, it's wide and tall, but does alleviate that somewhat with some gentle curving on the rear surface. We wouldn't ever call it super comfortable though. Now moving on, and there are a couple of things that the Poco F4 GT gets absolutely right, and they're in the media consumption department. Its combination of a big bright AMOLED display and the 4-speaker stereo system tuned by JBL combine to give you a phone that's absolutely brilliant for watching movies, music videos, TV shows and so on. There's not a lot new to say about the display itself because its configuration we've seen a few times before. It's a big 6.7-inch panel capable of reaching up to 120Hz refresh rates, supports 1 billion colours and has HDR10+ certification. All of those combine to ensure this is a phone that handles the brightest highlights and deepest blacks, while also delivering a wide spectrum of colours and super smooth refresh rates when the content on screen needs it. It's a genuinely very good display for consuming media on thanks to those qualities. The fact it's flat also helps, ensuring that you don't get any distortion or warping of colours towards the edges. If there's any criticism, it's that in its default vivid mode, it is ever so slightly oversaturated. But the good thing about MIUI 13, or MIUI 13, Poco's Xiaomi skin, is that you can adapt and adjust the colour balance of the screen a multitude of ways. We found setting it to the P3 setting gave us the colour profile we preferred. It was vibrant and rich without seeming too over the top and hyper real. It's a very good option to have. And while the display is undoubtedly bright, the auto brightness could do with some improvement. I often found it would darken a bit too much automatically and regularly reached for the brightness slider to manually adjust it. As for the loudspeakers placed on both the top and the bottom edge of the phone, they fire out sounds that are richer and fuller than the typical stereo speakers you get on most phones. They're also pretty loud, which means they're great for ensuring you don't miss any notifications, but also great for annoying any workers or colleagues you might have nearby. Onto power and speed now, and the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 inside means you get effortless speed and fluidity. It's got fast app loading and smooth animations. And with Poco software feeling quite fluid and responsive, this also adds to that feeling. In all of our testing, there was no single game that it struggled to deliver peak performance with, so it never stuttered or lagged, didn't drop any frames noticeably. The only thing really worth noting here, apart from being generally excellent, is that it does sometimes get a little warm after gaming for about 15 to 20 minutes. Sadly, there is one thing that hinders the speed and fluidity of this phone, and this is some elements of the MIUI software, or MIUI. Xiaomi's latest version adds quite a few unnecessary layers, like separating the quick settings from notifications. You can change it back, but still frustrating, and that's just one of the features. However, Poco's version of MIUI is at least lightweight in other regards. You don't get a ton of preloaded redundant apps, and the customization menu makes it really easy to change and adapt the look of the interface to your liking. As for the battery, despite being a relatively large 4700 mAh cell, a full charge didn't quite last us as long as we thought it might. On busy days, starting the day at 100%, we'd often find we'd drain nearly 80% of the battery by bedtime. On lighter days, even in a 4G only area, I'd struggle to make it last 2 days. Despite this, I never once had any form of battery anxiety because the charging speeds are quite frankly ridiculous. Like some of Xiaomi's other recent phones, it has a 120 watt wired charger in the box, and it can refill an empty battery in 17 minutes. That type of speed is basically life-changing. It's one of those features that meant we didn't ever resort to charging overnight. I simply waited until I got to that dreaded battery low notification when it drops below 20% and then plug it in. 10 to 15 minutes later, it was full again. Brilliant. Now moving on, and cameras definitely weren't the first priority when Poco made this phone, but that doesn't mean they're bad. The camera system on the back is more than capable of taking decent photos. It's reliable enough and quick enough to focus that it gives you a really nice, easy point and shoot experience, and still be confident of getting a usable shot for sharing on social media. Photos are sharp and in focus, and with enough colour and contrast to stop them from looking flat. In fact, it even focuses well on objects that are quite close up and small. We rarely had to move back and refocus to get a shot. But if there's any criticism, it's that the processing does appear to be quite heavy-handed on the contrast front, delivering a high contrast look with a bit too much darkness and shadows and dark crushed looking colours a lot of the time. It makes it look a bit unnatural. For the most part, if you use either the primary or the ultra-wide outdoors in good daylight, you will get good shots. Indoors, or when the light levels drop, you'll start to see noise creeping in on the darker shadowed parts of the image, however. And it's also worth noting there is a little bit of a difference between the results on the ultra-wide and the primary, with the former not looking quite as good as the latter. While relatively closely matched, there are instances where colours and contrast look a lot more muted on the ultra-wide, but not in a good way. They take on a slightly washed out appearance with rougher details. In the end, for a phone that costs around about £500 in the UK, the Poco F4 GT gets a lot of things right. It's fast, has a great big screen and loud speakers, and some nice touches like the LED lighting on the back and shoulder trigger buttons. MIUI, Xiaomi's skin, still needs a lot of taming to make it behave in the way that we want it to, with lots of needless layers, and at this point it's the only thing that stops this from being a truly great device. Let me know what you think of the Poco F4 GT in the comments down below. Have you got one? Are you buying one? Or will you just go for the regular F4? I've been Cam. I'm at Cam Bunton on social media. If you did like this video, please do leave a thumbs up, tap subscribe and the notification bell to make sure you don't miss any more. And I'll see you again in the next one. Bye for now.